Welcome to Life, Laughter, Divorce, episode 42. I am your host, Leanne Linsky.
And I'm the boyfriend.
So welcome back to another wonderful week of divorce, everybody. While you're out there tuning in on the internet, do you tune in on the internet? If you do, make sure you rate, review, and subscribe.
You have to dial it. You have to type stuff in. So you've got to
dial in.
Type in.
Type in while you're typing in. Yeah, do all of that. Unless you're driving. Do not do that while you're driving.
Hey, there's some voice activated things that I can just say, hey, Google, and it will do it for me. So you can do it while you're driving if you use your voice activated.
But not your thumbs. Don't use your little pinkies. Keep those babies on the wheel. So do that. Do that. Well, I'm excited about this week's episode. This week's episode is actually a two-parter. And our guest had quite the journey to share with us. And I want to give you a heads up on this one, you guys, that we had a little bit of technical difficulty switching from a headset to regular mic. And then our Skype call dropped and we had to reconnect. So there's a couple of volume difference or sound differences.
Yeah, sound differences.
Sound differences.
I did my best to try to fix it, but it's a little bit.
You did a pretty good job, but yeah, there's a noticeable difference. So just heads up for that's coming at you. But we had a wonderful discussion. And, you know, as I listened back on the episode, I was thinking it's kind of interesting how we get some things that are just brought into our life at the right time, at the right moment, you know?
Sometimes people show up at the right time. Sometimes things happen. Like you hear these stories that people finally give up on a job or they give up on something and then a new one shows up or a new job or a new opportunity shows up.
Yeah.
And those, I think this happened to everybody. You just have to pay attention to them and make a concerted effort to try to take advantage when they do show up.
Right. Like one door closes and two more open.
I'm trying to be.
Is it one door closes and like three windows open? I don't know.
I'm trying to actually explain it. And you're like using cliches and. I
don't know, but that's what came into my mind. I was like, is it a window? Or is it a door? Is it
that's
a vent?
What I'm working with
if
here,
you adjust the vent in this room, more air blows into the other room.
So yes, things come into your lives at the right time.
Yes.
And as long as you're open to them and you accept them, you can reap the benefits of those opportunities or people that come into your life.
Right. You can. And it's weird because, and I think we've mentioned this before. In fact, I'm pretty sure we have, that, you know, if we had met 5 or 10 years ago, we would have looked at each other and been like, no,
get out of my face.
You're weird. It just wouldn't have worked. But, I think that's the beauty of it is we go through these experiences and we learn and we grow from them. And then the next one comes in and then we're more prepared for that. So anyway, with our guest today, it was just really wonderful to hear how he's gone through his own journey.
And persevered.
Yeah.
Kept moving forward and found ways to keep himself moving forward, which can be a struggle at times. And you'll understand when you hear his story today.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, today is a two-parter. So make sure you come back next week and find out, which I'm sure you're going to want to tune in next week to hear the rest of our guest story. So you're probably wondering at this point, who is the guest today, Leanne?
Who is the guest today, Leanne?
Well, I'm glad you asked the boyfriend. Our guest today is Dave Conley. And Dave Conley has been a technology executive, an entrepreneur, and a startup consultant. But now, Dave is a health and wellness coach who helps lifelong overweight people lose 1/3 to 1/2 of their body weight, just like him. So without further ado, meet Dave Conley. Dave, welcome to Life, Laughter, Divorce podcast.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure having you here.
Great to be.
I am very excited to hear about your divorce journey and what you're doing today. So I think sometimes there's no better place to start than at the beginning.
Sure.
So, yeah, you've been married twice. So
I've been married twice. Yeah, I had an early starter marriage, kind of like a big surprise to my parents intentionally, and that was blessedly short. That was 3 years. So I was still in college, and she had just graduated, and we'd met each other at work, and at my summer job. Work. I make it sound like I was, like I was at the office. No, I was at my summer job, which she was at as well, and we'd met up there, and then gotten married. I had this big Catholic ceremony.
How old were you?
21. Okay,
yeah. So, and how did you met at your summer job?
Yeah. I was an usher at a theater. It's actually at Wolf Tramp Farm Park for the Performing Arts. It's this massive outdoor theater outside of Washington, D.C., and it's a national park. So I was an usher there, making sure people got to their seats, and she was a ranger, like the Smokey Bear hats.
Yeah.
And we met there and started dating.
So she wasn't a ranger at the theater.
Yeah, the whole thing is a national park, right?
Okay, so she was, so you were in the theater and she was at the park. Got it.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah.
Wow. So, and you're 21, you got married, and you said it was intentionally to surprise your parents?
I don't know if it was intentional, but it was certainly like, I'm going to rebel, and this is my crazy way of rebelling, which is, getting into a marriage.
Yeah.
It's a terrible way of
That's so opposite of what young people would do. It's like,
right. Doesn't it sound like it's like, I'm going to really get you. I'm going to get married.
I'm going to get married and I'm going to be responsible and have a job. Shake my fist. So how long did your marriage last? What was that like?
Oh, it wasn't good. We weren't good for each other. And we ended up, I was still in school. We ended up, she was looking for her first set of jobs right out of college, and I was still finishing up my degree poorly. And then we even ended up moving back into her parents' house, which, talk about uncomfortable. And then it just imploded from there. We knew it wasn't right for us. And as it was a bit of surprise to me, it was really kind of also the ideal thing that happened. So I wasn't expecting it, and I didn't expect her to just, basically say, hey, I've met somebody at work and I'm gone. I'm out of here. But on the other hand, it turned out to be really, a pivotal time for me and really the wise thing since it was so young. It didn't make any sense. I was now, 23. And after a couple of years, we just it wasn't right. Absolutely.
Right. Right. So at 23, at 23, that's when your first divorce happened.
Yeah. I mean, she didn't come home one day, and it was I was staying at her parents' house, and actually it was really strange. So just starting calling hospitals and the police department. It's like where does somebody just disappear to? Calling friends, calling other family members, and she ended up calling much later in the day, saying, look, she was at somebody else's house, and that was a really weird day. That was a day where she just announced that she wanted a divorce.
So that must have been a roller coaster, because you're in fear, probably wondering that worried that something terrible happened to her for hours.
Completely. Yeah.
And then,
yeah, right. And this was really before cell phones were like a big deal. It's like you sort of had them, but it wasn't like ubiquitous like it is today.
Right.
It was just a surprise call much later in the day.
So when you ended up getting the call, were you by yourself, or what transpired then?
So I was with her parents, and we were really just kind of lighting up the phone to figure out where she might be.
Right.
And that's when I got the phone call from her. So, ultra weird there, which is
Right.
I'm there with her parents looking for her, and I get the phone call saying, hey, I'm at, my coworker's house, and I don't want to be married anymore.
Oh.
And so, that's a hell of a phone call.
So were her parents supportive of you, or they probably felt terrible?
Well, I mean, at that point, it was just shock. It was shock all the way around because nobody really saw this coming. I mean, I knew it wasn't a good marriage, right? And I knew it wasn't going to. I didn't realize it was just going to implode all at once. And so then all the fear is ratcheted up all the way around. I was still in college, right? So I didn't have like a steady income. I was living with her parents, and now it was just like running through my mind. It's like, okay, where am I going to live now? And then it's like, oh, and you don't have a relationship anymore. It's like she was real clear, even with that conversation, which is like she's done, and she was definitely done. I think we saw each other maybe once or twice more in the entire time until we got divorced.
So, staying at her parents' house, and if you only saw her once or twice, did she just stay away until you cleared out?
Yeah, that was really it. I mean, we had some conversations over the phone, but we didn't see each other face to face.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. So after this, what was your mindset? Where did you go? What did you do?
It was certainly originally just panic, and then just like, okay, what am I going to be doing next? And a little bit of it was a surprise for sure. But it was also like, among the best things that could have happened to me, because I didn't know where I was. I didn't know where I was in life. And I just, and I was so young, right? 23. I mean, where were you when you were 23? Were you thinking about like, marriage and a life and things like that? I wasn't. I really didn't have an opportunity to actually just go out and play a little bit. I went from, being in college to being married and then not. And so it was an opportunity for me to just kind of evaluate where I was in the world and start again. And that was exactly the reset I needed.
So after that, what did you do? Did you jump right into another relationship, or was it a while?
It wasn't a while. It was a few months. I mean, it was really just a little bit about figuring out who I was, which I didn't know anything, and I still don't pretend to know much about that, but I know a little bit better about myself here. But it was a little bit about figuring out where I was and what I wanted in the world. And then it was started doing some dating. I hadn't really done a lot of dating, and it turned out that I wasn't going to end up dating a whole lot because I met somebody really special about 6 months in.
Okay. And so you met someone special, and then you ended up marrying this one?
It did. Well, it was a funny slide, really. It was one of those ones where you go out on a date and you go on a few more dates, and then it was a slow invasion into our apartment. It was just like, oh, why don't I'm going to leave some clothes here. I'm going to leave some toiletries here. Oh, why don't you have a drawer? Oh, why don't I move some stuff out of the closet for you? And then, within a few months, it's like, here's your key. And so it was just it was a slow move in.
Right. Okay. And so when you did this, were you hoping for another relationship, or it just kind of happened the same way into your mind as it did into her apartment?
It just kept on happening, right? It was one day where I just didn't go home, right? Got rid of my apartment, and it made sense. It really felt perfect. Mm. Mm-hmm. And that's what was so surprising, right? It wasn't an effort. You didn't have like a big discussion. It was like, oh, we should move in together. It organically and naturally happened. Right.
Okay. And then how long after did you get married?
It was about 6-7 months. In fact, it was a really cold, rainy November morning, and we were planning on going out of town anyways for Veterans Day. And I rolled over and I said, "Hey, why don't we go get married?" And she said, "Yeah." So we finished packing our bags. We went down to the courthouse, and just soaking wet. and got our marriage license, got somebody to come down and actually perform the ceremony for us. And we ended up just continuing on our weekend married. We even, it sounds kind of corny, but we even stopped and got those rings out of the gumball machines.
Yeah.
You know,
you actually did this. I've heard people talk about it, but you actually did it.
Actually did it, right? It sounds like a joke. It sounds like a corny joke, but we actually did that.
And were these the rings that you used in your wedding?
No.
Oh, okay.
We ended up actually, no. Well, yes, actually it was our wedding, right? It was our wedding that day. So yeah, we did use that. We used the ring on our wedding right there.
Oh, that's funny. So what happened with this marriage? Where did this take you?
Oh, it took me everywhere. Absolutely magic. I was married to Carol for 13 years. She was an executive for associations in the Washington, D.C. area. I was working in technology, and we really started a massive love affair. Yeah.
Wow. It sounds really nice, and you were very happy.
Oh, extraordinarily.
Right. What made this marriage so different?
I think what made it different was all the little things, and it was the way Carol knew what I needed, even when I didn't know I needed something. It was the way that we spent time with each other. Nothing ever got old. Nothing ever got boring. We were really exploring life together and living together. It was a 1 + 1 = 3. Just everything was better and brighter, and we were building a real big life with each other. It was never boring. There was always something amazing going on in our world. And we really just complemented each other really well. She was by far the smartest person I had ever met. And I worked with like actual rocket scientists. And she had just tremendous depth. I mean, let's put it this way. We were building, we bought a new home, and it needed like a lot of work done to it, a lot of renovation and a lot of landscaping. And to really get into landscaping, she started just studying like crazy. So she ended up actually getting her master's in like some sort of horticultural design thing, and just to do this incredible garden that we had. So this place that we were living just out of Washington, D.C., we had a little bit of land, a nice front yard, a nice backyard, and everything around it made it a full year garden. Like something was always going on every single month. And that's how she approached things. Like she really dove into things and really made them amazing, right? Yeah. So she'd ended up not wanting to go and be an executive anymore, and so she sort of semi-retired out of that, and she decided she wanted to go back to her first love, which was teaching. And because of the way that teachers are certified, and particularly in Virginia, she actually had to go back to school in order to get her certification. And so she went and she got her master's degree in education in order to go and teach grade schoolers. And she loved it. And this was somebody who just really threw themselves into things and really made a difference. She loved doing taxes. It's like,
what?
Who the hell loves doing taxes? But then I thought about it. Well, CPAs kind of love doing taxes, and she loves doing taxes, right?
Yeah.
And she loved helping people. Like there wasn't, if anybody needed help, she was the first one there. Particularly if you were a dog or a cat or a human being who needed some help, she was right there. So she became an expert in taxes in order to help the underprivileged actually do their taxes. And the underprivileged really need to do their taxes because that's how social services are done these days. So you have to file your taxes, and then you can get things like food credit and housing, the rest of it. So she went and she volunteered for organizations in order to get people to get their taxes done, and she loved it. And so this was just somebody who was constantly giving and constantly just making good in the world, and just wicked brilliant, wicked smart, and funny. So yeah, Carol, absolutely amazing.
It sounds like it. I mean, she's done some really wonderful things. What were you doing during this time?
During all this time, well, I started, so I was rolling back into my divorce period. I was really struggling. I had changed my major in college like 3 or 4 times. I had something like 200 credit hours, and it wasn't a master's degree. This was my bachelor's degree. And a friend of mine called me up and said, "Hey, my company is hiring crazy. They're hiring stupid. You should definitely come down. And you qualify." And I'm like, "Well, what for?" And he goes, "It doesn't matter. Just do you have a resume?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, you got a suit, right?" And it's like, "Yes." So go get your suit on, put together a resume, and come down. And I go down to this office, and it's actually in a big cafeteria, and it's just a sea of people in there. And I sit down with this guy, I'll never forget his name, Rick Higgins. And he asked me a bunch of questions, and I kind of like stumble through it. And I'm still just looking around at this sea of people, just wondering why I was there. And once he finished, I grabbed my book bag and went to class, right? Mm-hmm. And the next morning, Leanne called, from HR, and she said, "Congratulations, we'd like to offer you a job as a project manager." And this wasn't the wisest question I had ever done. My question to Leanne was, "What's a project manager do?" And she was the consummate professional. She skipped right over that, and she said, "Hey, what were you thinking about making?" And I was doing the math as fast as I could in my head, which is like, I would really like to get out of my parents' basement. I would really like to pay for my car and put some gas in it. I want to take a woman out every now and then. Man, I would be rolling in it if I made $28,000 a year. Rolling. And I say this to Leanne, and she says, "That's good because it starts at 32.
Oh my goodness.
Like, yeah, fantastic. So that's when I started my career in technology.
So this was before Carol?
This was, So just as I got this job and I started working, Carol and I met. So I roll back all the way to that because all things sort of happened at once.
Okay.
My divorce was finalized. I had been dating a little bit then, and I got this great job, and that just took off. And I met Carol all at the same time. So it's really like starting that year, like so many great things just happened all at once. And that was the beginning of my career in technology.
Okay. And now you know what a project manager does.
Right. I do know what project manager does. And I did it pretty well. Actually, my first job was basically to get everybody on the internet for the first time. So that was a pretty good gig. I got 32 million people on the internet for the very first time.
Really?
Yeah. You ever use AOL?
I was just going to ask you, are you the one who sent us those CDs?
Send you the CDs. I know who did. I was responsible for all of the software on those CDs. So once you put those things in, once you put the CD actually in your computer and something pops up and you had to do something, that was my stuff. So I was the guy who was responsible for making sure all of that got into your machine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
We have you to thank for all of this.
Yeah, I will take that. Thanks. Me and several hundred other, internet entrepreneurs at the very dawn of time.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool. Very cool. Yeah. And just a few episodes back, we were just talking about a couple who they were met online, and we were like, was it AOL? So
did they? Was it?
I think it was right after that. They said it was right after that they had met. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's funny. So here you are with Carol. Things are going really well. She's an incredible woman. Yeah. Things are taking off for you. And then what?
Well, so AOL went sideways. We got mixed up with Time Warner, and I just kind of rode it into the ground. I had become a senior executive. I was doing like CompuServe and Netscape and
yeah.
So a lot of the old school stuff. But this was coming into the mid 2000s. And so I ended up just finally taking a package and getting out of there. And I took about a year off in order to actually help raise my nephew and niece, and to help my sister-in-law divorce my brother, which that made for an uncomfortable Thanksgiving.
Wow. Yeah. No. Yeah.
That's another divorce conversation. That was something else. My brother is. I'm very, very close with my sister-in-law. I'm very, very close with my nephew and niece. Not so much my brother. And so that was a situation where, we had to get her out of that space. And so Carol and I helped her get divorced from my brother.
Wow, you have good relations with your in-laws.
You know what? We tend to marry really well.
Yeah, but your first wife too. I mean, that's pretty good.
We do tend to marry okay.
So you take on 2 kids that you're helping out for your sister-in-law, and you go through a divorce with her.
Went through a divorce with her. Yeah, that was a challenge, but we really all rallied around her in order to make sure that she had everything that she needed in order to keep those kids going, which is, I'm sure you've heard over and over again, trying to balance a divorce, trying to balance your kids, and trying to balance your work all at the same time. Well, that's a special kind of crazy.
Yeah. You're in the midst of a terrible storm, and you can't see it. That's a very challenging place to be.
And it took both of us. So I got a phone call just as the Obama administration was coming in, and a friend of mine called and said, "Hey, how would you like to unfuck the government?" And I'm like, "I'm in. I'm all down with that." So he hired me on to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and I was responsible for all of their systems. So, like, if you had to file like a patent or a trademark, then they were all my systems. So I did that for a few years, and really was looking at a career in government, and that was when. Well, to back up a little bit, I guess I think one of the things that happened to me as I kept on being promoted was that I just kept on being more and more miserable at my job. And I really thought starting at the patent office would be like this great break. I always thought it was like, crappy, the crappy other executives or the politics or the red tape or whatever it is. Right. Mm-hmm. And, when I got in the patent office, I was really excited about that, about this fresh new start. And yet that same sort of miserable feeling crept over me again. And I got like the perfect question from a friend of mine. She said, "When were you happiest in your career?" And I said, "Well, it was those early days at AOL when I was like, changing the world." But then she asked me the perfect question at the perfect time, which was, why? And that's what put me back on my heels. It was like, why was it? And it was that, we made a difference in everybody's lives, and we did it so intimately and personally. When we did something great, we heard about it, right? When we did something bad, this was back in the day, my phone actually would start ringing with customers. They would call me up and say, put it back, change that. Don't do that. Right. We like it just the way it is. Or can you do this? I get feature requests from customers. And when we did something really wrong, we were on the front page of every newspaper on the planet. Mm-hmm. And it was that making a difference for someone that really made everything. And when I was promoted up to such senior levels, and when I was at the patent office, I was making the world safe basically for patent attorneys. And that's why I wasn't very happy. And so one day, this was my world, right? I was in a miserable job. I was a pack-a-day smoker. And I weighed 330 pounds. Mm. And my real joy in the world was Carol. And one day she caught a cold, and I just was leaving for work. And it was really unusual for Carol to be, like knocked down on the couch, right? She was one of those people who was like, even though she was sick, she was at least, bopping around. It was never like sick in bed. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And this time she was out on the couch. It was unusual. And so I went to work and I came back. She was still on the couch. Next day goes by and she was just not doing well. And I said, look, if you're still like this, I'm going to come home from work early, and, we're going to, like on the back of the health insurance card, there was like that nurse's number. It's like, hey, if you have an issue, just give us a call. Mm-hmm. And so I came home and she was still laid out. And I gave, I called that number, and I said, yeah, she's got this band across her back and she's not doing well. And I said, oh my God, there's a band across her back. And I'm like, yeah. And I said, well, that can be a symptom of a heart attack in a woman. Get an aspirin in her and call the ambulance. So called the ambulance. They came and said, no, she's not having a heart attack, but we want to bring her in anyways. Mm-hmm. And so brought her into the hospital, and they were running tests, and they weren't sure what was going on. They knew that she was, having some fluid in her lungs. And so they brought her in, and they just said, okay, we're going to admit you, and we're going to run more tests. And we're shocked, right? This was a cold, right? This wasn't like a major health event. There was nothing on our radar. She was having a cold, and yeah, there was fluid in her lungs. So again, it just didn't make any sense that we were now in the hospital. And they came in and they put a tube in her chest in order to actually to drain some of that stuff. And it was just tremendous relief. She could talk, she could breathe, like the old Carol was coming back. And we fell asleep, side by side in this hospital room. And the morning comes by, and the nurse comes by early in the morning and is shaking Carol, trying to get her out. And all I remember was alarms going off and the room being flooded with people. And they grabbed the bed and shot down the hallway. And just in complete shock and bewilderment, I was like, what the hell is going on? It's just like, that's the point of absolute panic where, your skin is on fire and you're just like wondering what's going to be going on here.
Right.
And that was the series of events which went from that moment where she had a stroke to turning off the life support 60 hours later.
Wow.
Yeah.
I am so sorry.
Yeah.
What happened was that completely took you by surprise, everybody by surprise.
Right. Again, somebody goes in for a cold and ends up, not coming out. And it happens. She had psoriasis. And psoriasis is you might have seen it on people. It's this red, scaly patchiness, particularly on hands and on elbows, and it looks like a skin condition. It is a skin condition, and it's underneath all the skin condition is that it's an autoimmune problem. and it manifests itself by having your skin cells around your joints just produce too much skin too fast. And that's that redness and that's that scaliness. And she had it for years. And, it wasn't really something you really treated. There wasn't a whole lot you could do about it. It looked a little bit ugly, but, it is what it is. Lots of people have psoriasis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when she passed, or when she passed, doctors, they can't say they're sorry. They can't say they made a mistake. That's something that, the insurance companies won't let them say. That's, they won't say that. But the doctor came to me and without saying sorry, he said, "We haven't seen this in 15 years. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Said, well, people don't die of psoriasis, but your wife did. When, we put in the tube, her body thought it needed to attack it, and it started producing white blood cells just as fast as it could, just like for the psoriasis. The psoriasis just sent her entire body into overdrive, and that's what happened. That's what caused the strokes, and that they couldn't stop.
Mm. Wow. Wow. And how were you?
Well, I think not good is the understatement.
Mm-hmm.
I think in 11 years, we probably spent no more than 3 months apart. We were always together. Except for maybe business trips, but we spent all of our time with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, it's one of those things where I wasn't like a real believer in like a soul. But when she died, I definitely became a believer because I knew where it lived. It was right in the center of my chest, and it wasn't there anymore. It was not good. I'd stopped eating. I'd stopped drinking. The one thing that I knew I needed to do was to make sure that all the alcohol was out of the house. And it was massive depression. Just shock and grief and just not moving. It was just like everything. It was like the light in my world had disappeared. And you have all of this energy. I know that sounds weird, but you have all of this grief energy. And you don't sleep, you don't eat. You're just on fire. You're burning with grief and despair. You spend a lot of time crying. And my friends and my family, they didn't know what to do with me. They were getting really concerned. And a friend of mine had just gotten his pilot's license. And he said, look, I want to take you up. I didn't, sure, whatever, get me out of the house. And so he took me up, and it was this beautiful, brilliant blue day. You could see all the way to West Virginia. And as we were tooling around, he just kind of stops and he looks at me and he said, the one thing that they drill into us over and over again, the one thing that every time you're going up and you're learning to fly, you do this every single time. When you are certain you are going to die, when you are certain that this plane and you are going to be hitting the ground, the one thing that they teach you to do every single time is to just let go of the stick. And because a plane is meant to fly, if you just stop fighting it so much, it'll fly. So just let go. And at that moment, that became a metaphor of my life, because I really had thought that my life was, that I had some modicum of control, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it was about money or accomplishment or title, or all of the things that I thought that I can control. But suddenly my entire world was knocked out from underneath me. And I realized, you know what? Actually, I don't have much control here. When it gets down to it, what can you actually control? And it was at that moment, it's like, okay, I'm in crisis here. What is the one thing I need to do? Well, I wasn't drinking. I knew I needed to get I needed to get water in me. And that was it. I had these 1 liter Nalgene bottles, the ones you can see through,
Mm-hmm.
a big mouth Nalgene.
Yeah.
I said, man, if I could just drink one of these a day, I got something. And so that was it. Even if that was the only thing I did in a day, was manage to get myself up out of bed and drink a liter of water, I was going to do that. And that was a good day. And so that started to be my way of battling back from this grief and depression. So that was the very first thing I did. And then it was like, okay, now how do I want to, then that gives you enough space to actually think about what I might want in my life. It can get you out of like that immediate crisis. It's like, okay, can I think a little bit about today? What do I want to do today that is beyond drinking water? And it's like, well, I need to get a little food in me. It's like, okay. So I'm going to build up on that. So I'm going to go from drinking water to getting a little food in me. Like, fantastic. So I got 1, I got 2. It's like, if I get those 2 things down, what's the other thing I want to do? Well, I want to move a little. There was days in there where there was just no movement. There was no eating, no drinking, and no movement. It was just really like, I had already died. It was just that I was still breathing.
So you had really hit your own bottom.
That was rock bottom.
And it took going up into an airplane.
Right.
To wow. That's a kind of a, I don't know if you'd say it's ironic, but what a funny way to turn that around by taking you up so high from where you were in the depths of grief.
And it was drinking water and eating some food and moving a little bit. And that's how I started to rebuild my life.
Starting completely over from scratch.
Completely.
So,
I lost the love of my life, right? This was my left and my right hand. This was everything. And now she was gone. So, when you lose a spouse, everything changes, right? Who you identify yourself as a couple, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and then suddenly everything's different, like the things that you used to do as a couple aren't there anymore, down to TV shows that you watched or things that you enjoyed doing. Suddenly it's just you, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing sadder than going to a restaurant saying table for one, that's just weird.
Yeah.
And then, it's like, well, now it's an uncertain economic future too, right? It's like, okay, this was somebody that I was married to and that we were doing something together. So it's like your economic future. So your entire future is different than it was. And so your present's different, your past is different, or your past is like what it was, and the future is completely different too. So now you're looking at this as like everything is different. So that was a huge part of the shock that you're saddled with, is like,
right.
Well, it went from fine, and then 60 hours later, not fine, like everything different.
So I have a question for you, because you're absolutely right. It went from being one way and all of a sudden completely different.
Mm-hmm.
In your first marriage, you went from that morning going about your normal business, coming home, then she's missing, having this roller coaster of fear. What happened? You find out she's okay, but your marriage is over.
Yes.
How?
And say again?
So, many of us experience divorce,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's many of us who experience death of a spouse, but the grieving process has got to be so different and yet so similar.
Yeah. I mean, certainly the massive channel change was there. Now, what was different was that that was already a situation that I knew was broken, right? It wasn't, that was, my first marriage wasn't a good marriage. We were young, we were dumb, we were all over the map. We weren't thriving. We weren't successful. We were going sideways and starting to, not talk about anything, but really starting to just do our own thing, right? We were starting to kind of unconsciously separate, and then that there was this big event that kind of lit the match that blew everything up. Or the match that lit whatever it is that blew it all up. And that, it wasn't shocking. And there was some relief in there. There was a grieving process. There was the, it's like, oh, that was something, and we didn't spend any time trying to fix it. We just like, it just ended. And then it was just, the pain in the ass of pulling everything apart, right? It's like, okay, let's separate the bank accounts. Let's, the bills, the debt, the cars, the cats, it's like everything. And then, I had, the extra baggage of like figuring out where I was going to live. And it just happened really, really quick. Right. I went, and so part of that was good. And part of that, because it all had to happen all at once. So there was no long drawn out process of like fights and things that, kind of degraded, the overall thing until, we'd had enough. It was really, it was just like a quick Band-Aid pull, and then, man, then the anger gets to set in, then the annoyance gets to set in. But it was really the best direction for both of us. Carol and I, we were in a great marriage. And it was sudden and awful. I mean, going from things are fine. We just had Christmas, January, and, kind of I just had my birthday, and looking forward to seeing, we were starting to plan a vacation for the late spring. So these are things that like couples do, right? And then suddenly you don't, and none of that matters anymore. And it's gone. I mean, it's just gone. It's like you'd been kidnapped and put into a black bag and thrown down a flight of stairs. It's just, everything was different.
Yeah. Quite traumatic. And your life is upside down. So as you went through this grieving process and you were basically starting over with just your basic needs and taking care of and self-care at this point.
Complete self-care. And this was the luxury that I could afford myself, because I didn't have a choice, right? It's not like I was going to go back to work and actually just have a fine time of it or distract myself at work. I wasn't going to be able to get to work. Driving was a challenge, right? When drinking a liter of water is a pain in the ass, the idea of running a technology organization isn't anywhere on the radar. And so then it's like, okay, eating good food, right? And then getting some movement in. This was the foundation of just like radically taking care of myself. And I hadn't been taking care of myself. Yes, I had a great marriage. Yes, I was successful, in my work world. And I was also 330 pounds and a pack a day smoker. This was my doctor. What 40-year-old guy, what 39-year-old guy gets pulled aside by his doctor and says, look, at your weight and what you're doing to yourself, said 3 things basically get us all. Either a heart attack, a stroke, or cancer. This is universally what will kill us. I said, it's not crazy talk for somebody to have something in their 40s. It happens. The difference between you and everyone else in their 40s is they will survive and be back 100%. And if it doesn't kill you, you will not be back 100%. And this was a conversation I was having with my doctor at 39. Mm-hmm. So I was well on my way to an early grave. And then I have my world turned upside down, and I am forced from a world where I'm working all the time and really distracting myself and not paying attention to my mind or my body practices into a situation where I had to, because it was crisis, right? Not eating, not good, not drinking water, really, really bad, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so having to be very conscious about what I was doing. And that was building myself back up in order to actually go back to work, right? I needed to focus on myself first. And that was really the beginning of what has turned into a passion of mine and what I do now with other people, which is this radical self-care of really first paying attention to yourself so that you can be out there and pay attention to others and pay attention to your vocation, pay attention to your community, and pay attention to all those other things, because so often we flip that. So often we pay attention like I was all about work or all about like distraction, right? It feels good to sit in front of the TV set and eat Ben and Jerry's and have a glass of wine or scotch.
Yeah.
Right? It feels good. And so that's an easy distraction, and it's easy for millions of people to do every day. And that was something that I was doing.
Right.
And that's how you put on, 330 pounds.
So you're finding out that you have to do this self-care, and you have to get back to eating well, and you have to get your health in check in order to move forward with life, right? Were you not working at this point? Did you take off from work?
Yeah, I was on leave.
Okay.
So yeah, I was in my government gig and I was just on leave.
Okay. And how long did it take you to get your health on track? Was it a short period of time, long period of time?
Well, it took years to get it on track, but really the beginning of it was, I was starting to kind of really get out of this crazy haze of grief and depression, really starting to focus on this self-care probably about 6 to 8 weeks after she passed. So not a crazy amount of time, but enough to where like you had this tremendous shock, and I started taking care of myself and then starting to ease myself back into work. So those two things just started at the same time.
Thanks for listening to part 1. Make sure you tune in next week for part 2, where we learn about Dave Conley's journey into health and wellness and his third marriage and his new business. This you don't want to miss.